watching NRA TV with Bill Whittle.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Los Angeles, California. I'm Bill Whittle. This is the Hot Mike Show. Hot Mike, unfortunately, cannot be here today. He's got a photo shoot. He's actually got a recurring gig. He plays, it's a photo character for Harlequin Romances. He plays Trantor, the Algerian pirate, and they've got a new book coming out. I think it's Trantor and the Ohio Housewife, something like that. In any event, he's at a photo shoot today, so we won't be able to make it. Hope to see him tomorrow. Today, our topic is censorship, but the kind of censorship that is actually the most pernicious kind of censorship of all, and that's what I like to call invisible censorship. It's the kind of censorship that happens without you really knowing about it. Our government was structured almost 250 years ago, was structured in such a way that government censorship, even today, is virtually impossible. The checks and balances built into the Constitution and the veneration of the First Amendment, generally speaking, by both Democrats and Republicans, has kept the idea of government censorship pretty much in check, with one or two exceptions. Actually, it's not even censorship in that case. I'm thinking of Dinesh D'Souza and the filmmaker that made the movie that Hillary Clinton blamed Benghazi on. But in terms of the government saying, no, you can't publish that, or in terms of the government's pulling, programs off the air, that doesn't seem to really happen, not for political reasons anyway. They certainly used to censor for profanity, and I suppose they still do. The kind of censorship that we're facing today has got an awful lot to do with the fact that new media, social media, which is essentially internet media, is not something that can be controlled. There's not something that the FCC can control. It's not something that the ABC censors can control. It's a pretty much wide open free-for-all. That comes with a downside, certainly. There's some lunatics out there, and there's some nastiness, some genuine hateful people out there. But the bottom line fact is that the internet was designed to survive a nuclear attack. It was built in such a way so that information would be sent out in multiple different packets, and they'd all arrive at the destination, and they'd be checked and so on. So it's virtually impossible to bring it down. Now, this presents a problem if you're a power-hungry totalitarian statist, because those pesky citizens out there now have the means to talk directly to each other, not having to go through multi-million-dollar studios with approval from the Federal Communications Commission and so on. The nerve of those great unwashed hordes of knuckle-dragging savages. They can actually speak to each other one-to-one directly on the internet in very much the same fashion that we're doing now, and certainly in the same fashion that I've been doing at BillWhittle.com for 7 or 8 years now. I've got, 5,000-6,000 videos on various places, and somebody did a calculation, and I've had 50 million views on YouTube. Now, most of those is me checking the counter to see how many views I've got, but nevertheless, it's still a pretty big number. So the question then becomes, how do you censor this? If you are a left-wing totalitarian, how do you stop something this egalitarian? How do you stop something this open, this robust, this almost infinite in terms of size? Well, you got to do it somehow, because as we're about to find out today, if conservatives have a chance to get into an argument, anything looking remotely like a fair fight with the left goes down. So that fight has to be prevented. Now, YouTube has actually started a censorship program, as you can see from the video here. And as always, they're masking it in the fig leaf of virtue. Basically, what they're saying is they're going to be cracking down on hate speech and fake news. And here's the problem with YouTube cracking down on hate speech and fake news. It's the same problem with censorship of any kind anywhere. And the problem is, who decides what is censorship? Who decides what is fake news? Who decides what is hate speech? Look, folks, it's pretty simple, really. Free speech is either free or it's not. It's not free, but it's not kind of free. It's not free on Saturdays. It's free or it's not. When you have freedom of speech, you will get some obnoxious, hateful, disgusting, disgraceful, obscene, awful, awful, awful content. And that is the price you pay. Because if you don't, then somebody has to make a decision. When I was a little boy, it's a long story. I'll try to keep it short as possible. I was 5, 6-year-old boys when I was growing up, drew pictures of airplanes, and World War II was not too far behind us. So I grew up in the mid-'60s. My dad was a World War II vet. And I drew pictures of American airplanes shooting down German planes and stuff and the bullets coming out. And so I was drawing a German plane, and I was trying to get the swastika on the wing right, because if you're a young kid, a swastika is a little difficult to draw. So I practiced on my hand. I came home one day, my dad saw a swastika drawn on my hand, and that's about the only time I've ever seen him like all the way angry. It took my mom to explain to him that he's just basically trying to do this for the drawings because my dad fought against the Nazis. Here's why I tell that story. Many, many years later, when the Nazis were marching in, was it Skokie, I want to say, Illinois? I remember thinking, my God, my dad is going to want these people just banned. He's just going to say, lock them up. And he said, no, Bill, we can't lock them up. I said, what do you mean? He said, no, they got to march. What? Yeah, they got to march, because the problem is, if we say that the Nazis can't march, then who decides who can march and who can't? Who decides? And if somebody can decide, then we're done. We're finished. That stayed with me. So somebody wants to censor YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and all the rest, and they're doing it, and in a moment we'll get to how. But I'll tell you who wants to censor it. It's people like John Podesta. You may remember John Podesta. He's the guy who basically, during Hillary Clinton's campaign manager, Podesta's the guy who said, let's pay people to go to Donald Trump protests and violently disrupt them, and that way we can make Trump look like a bunch of, Trump supporters look like a bunch of violent lunatics. And Podesta's also the guy who kind of, made sure that Bernie Sanders didn't win the nomination. John Podesta is an evil man who belongs in jail. And I don't think there's much question about that. But let me just quote. I'm quoting directly from this Breitbart article from a day or two ago, where John Podesta says that social media companies should police fake news. The direct quotes from the Breitbart article. This is Podesta speaking. I think that, again, the social media companies have a responsibility to try to do a better job of knocking off fake sites and be able to police, to some extent, the propagation of fake news. So Podesta thinks that social media companies have a responsibility to knock off fake news sites and police content. Who decides what's a fake news site, John? Can we agree that CNN is a fake news site? CNN, the company that gave your candidate debate questions ahead of the debate and gave her an incredibly unfair advantage. That company, the company that James O'Keefe has video of executives saying, no, the whole Russia story it's nothing there. It's really just fake news. Is that who you're talking about? You're talking about social media as being sure that CNN is kicked off of the internet, make sure that Facebook doesn't run any CNN videos, that YouTube isn't showing any CNN content. Is that the kind of fake news you're talking about, John? Just curious, just trying to get the situation straightened out. He said that the propagation of fake news was a national security threat, complaining that, quote, Russian bots and trolls, unquote, help spread negative stories about Hillary Clinton across the internet. Let's just say that's true for a second. What if it was Russian bots and trolls that spread stories of Hillary Clinton storing national security secrets on an illegal server, and that she contacted people, including the President of the United States, illegally in direct violation of federal law? Those the kind of trolls that you're talking about, John? The kind of trolls that spread stories like that, which we used to refer to as the truth, and the uncovering of which used to be the job of the press? That the kind of thing you're talking about? A couple other things here. He said that he admitted that it might be impossible to fully police content on social media, and that was, quote, a problem that would have to be fought within the American democracy. That American democracy that John Podesta would so desperately like to get rid of, because the American democracy that John Podesta wants to patrol and police is the same American democracy that put him and his miserable low-life boss out of a job. They should all be in jail. That democracy, that's the one he wants to have a little problem with. He says you can't just ignore it. You have to deal with it and come to terms with it. Offering advice for future Democratic candidates. By the way, if you're a future Democratic candidate, by all means, speaking as a Republican, please, 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 please take all of the advice from John Podesta that you possibly can. And finally, he basically said that Hillary Clinton's campaign failed to use social media as effectively as President Barack Obama did, that these channels were flooded with information from dubious sources, and that the Clinton campaign didn't do enough to fight back. John, the dubious sources that you're talking about are journalists. They're not CNN journalists. They're not real world media journalists. They're individual citizens who uncovered your incredible violations of federal law. No wonder you want socialism. No wonder you want socialism. Censorship, both. Real censorship, the dangerous censorship, is the kind of censorship you don't realize is even happening. So now that I've gotten that out of my system, let's bring in a guest who really has a very, very deep and clear insight into this. Our friend Craig Strazzeri is the Chief Marketing Director for Prager University. We have a lot of friends in common, do a lot of work together. Prager is a titan, and Prager University was and is a determined, extremely well-produced effort to take fundamental civic issues and portray them as accurately as possible. And if you're going to tell the truth to the American people, that's something that has to be stopped right quick, isn't it, Craig?
That's exactly right. Well, thank you for having me on, Bill. This last week just marked the 1-year anniversary when PragerU team discovered that YouTube is restricting over 20 of our videos. And for those of you who haven't seen the PragerU videos, they're very educational in nature. They're animated with a well-known presenter talking about topics like, why did America fight the Korean War? That's one of the videos that YouTube does not want young people to see, which is actually just laughable. They hide behind, excuses of algorithms and, community flagging. But I've actually had some interesting conversations with YouTube staff members recently, and I've learned some telling information that's actually even more scary than we initially thought in terms of how deliberate this is.
You have had conversations with YouTube staffers. Can you give me, before I go on, can you give me just 2 or 3 more titles of the kind of things that have been age restricted? In other words, these are the kind of things that cannot be seen by anyone under the age of 18. And so we're crystal clear on this, ladies and gentlemen. We are talking about people who are having a political conversation. There's not so much as a damn in them, I'll bet you. There certainly is no word that you wouldn't feel comfortable speaking at your Thanksgiving dinner at home, and the people that watch the show are the finest people in America. What are some of the other titles that they've restricted to 18 years or older, Craig?
Yeah, so there's 28 of them, so I'll name off a few. The Least Diverse Place in America, which is about the lack of diversity of thought on college campuses. Why America Must Lead. Who's More Pro-Choice, Europe or America? Who Not to Vote For. That was a very comedic video with Adam Carolla, just basically talking about don't vote for the guy who says, I'll fight for you, and, who just promises you everything, which is, there is absolutely no reason that should be censored.
Craig, hold on right there. This is really, really important. The one you just mentioned, because I've seen the Adam Carolla video. It's terrific. When he says in the video, when he says who not to vote for, does he say don't vote for Hillary Clinton?
No.
Of course not, because that'd be a violation of your 501c3 status, and you'd have to be a 501c4. So, folks, let's just be clear on this. A comedian has a video at Prager University, a well-known comedian, well-known and popular comedian, saying don't vote for the person who's making you all of these promises because they're just using it to get political power. There's not a curse word in it, and YouTube has decided that that kind of material cannot be seen by anybody under the age of 18. Is that fair, Craig, what I just said?
That's exactly right. And so when we first discovered this, the first response YouTube gave us was that, there's an algorithm that detects keywords that are inappropriate or objectionable, and restricted mode is meant to keep kids from watching pornographic or violent content. Anyone who's seen our videos, again, will obviously know that our videos are neither violent nor pornographic. And so recently I went to YouTube's offices in New York. They had invited a lot of conservative organizations out to YouTube, and they specifically said with a smile on their face, if you are having any issues with your channel that you want to bring up, we're here for you. We want to help get them resolved. So I raised my hand and said, well, we are having an issue at PragerU. You're restricting 28 of our videos, which is making it nearly impossible for young people to see them. And there's no reason that they should be restricted. They're educational in nature, very appropriate. The only reason they seem to be restricted are that we are conservative and have conservative ideas. And so their response, again, hid behind algorithms and community flagging. But very recently, so 2 days ago, we got a call from YouTube saying after a manual review, so meaning they had actual people at YouTube rewatch the 28 videos that we appealed as being restricted. After they rewatched them, people at YouTube, I keep saying it because it's actually hard to believe, they said, yes, these videos should be restricted. Young people should not see them. So when we pressed them further, I pressed them on the specific topic of why America fought in the Korean War. They said, well, YouTube is a family-safe environment, and war is not a family-safe topic. So, I mean,
is that right? Let me just stop you right there. War is not a family-safe topic on YouTube. Is that right? Well, I would like to have somebody take a quick count of the number of video game playing segments there are on YouTube. I want to know how many people are being knifed in the throat in Call of Duty on YouTube right now. I'll bet you anything that 10,000 videos like that are added every single day to YouTube. Every single day. Family-friendly place where we don't want to get people upset about war. You go to YouTube and look at some of these gaming channels, and you will see the most unbelievable, appalling acts of violence, and they're being narrated by 15-year-olds, and they're getting 60 million views. That takes a lot of nerve, Craig. That takes a lot of nerve for them to say that to your face.
It does, and I even took it a step further, and I let them know on the Korean War specifically, I'm in restricted mode. I turned on the filter to see, and I typed in Korean War. Not only did I find several videos on the Korean War, not PragerU's because that was restricted, but there are videos on the Korean War from left-leaning sites like Crash Course, for example, that make similar short animated videos on the same topic that they say is so forbidden on YouTube, and they still show up under restricted mode when it's from a left-leaning perspective. So it's just, we didn't have many doubts to begin with, the lack of rational response from them over the last year since we've identified this issue, but now it's just absolutely clear. They don't like us because we're conservative. They don't like us because we're successful. Last year, we had 250 million views. This year, we already have over 350 million views. We have over 2 million views every single day with our PragerU videos, and they're reaching young people. That's our main demographic. So YouTube doesn't like that we're so easily reaching the next generation, and we're actually having an impact. So what do? They slow it down by restricting 28 of our videos and making them a little harder to access for young people.
I'm going to use some language that you never would find in a PragerU university, but those miserable low-life bastards. We're going to be back in 2 minutes after the break, and we'll continue this discussion with our friend Craig Strazzeri. He's the Chief Marketing Officer for PragerU. We're talking about invisible censorship on the Hot Mike Show right here on NRA TV.
1 second, nothing is going on. The next second, the Quick Trip's on fire, the meat market's on fire.
In 2009, my husband was murdered right in front of me by a man who was stalking me.
She was still waiting for her permit to be approved long after New Jersey's 30-day waiting period had passed.
Even a stable society like America's is really on a razor's edge.
Our history is that we've always utilized and exercised our right to bear arms because it's been life or death.
When a criminal starts misusing me, I am going to use whatever necessary to get that criminal off my back.
The firearm is the only thing that gives me a fighting chance.
Gun laws that only apply to the law-abiding citizens. How can that be right?
We don't trust our soldiers stateside, carry weapons on military bases. I mean, that's insane.
It doesn't say the right of the property owner to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. It is the right of the people. So yes, it applies to all of us.
You've been warned. You might learn something.
Your determination to defend individual freedom, joined with the other issues at the very heart of this race, ensured that only one candidate could receive the approval of the American people: Donald Trump. The disgraceful media attempted to manipulate your emotions. They tried to suppress your enthusiasm, your speech, your vote. But you would not be distracted from the core freedom that was truly at stake. And for that, you deserve the gratitude of the entire nation. You proved the founders right, that the ultimate check and balance in this country is the American people.
Everybody, welcome back to the Hot Mic Show. I'm Bill Whittle, and we're talking about invisible censorship today, the censorship of conservative content on social media. And our guest today is Craig Strazzeri. He's the Chief Marketing Officer for PragerU, which just before the break we realized is in fact having a major impact on how young people get some actual information. I think he said 250 million views earlier. Did you say almost 300 million this year alone so far?
Yeah, this year we have 350 million views. We have almost 2 million views every single day.
Dude, that is, just let's put this into some context, because I know sometimes conservatives out there just feel hopeless. They see the mainstream media, television, and all this other stuff. They say, how can we compete with this? But this is just PragerU now on their own. If they're getting 2 million views a day, the days when a show like Cheers or Friends could pull in 10, 20 million viewers, those days are long, long, long gone. A big hit on cable news now is 200,000 viewers, 300,000 viewers. They're doing 10 times what MSNBC is doing in any particular hour, and that is starting to alarm them a little bit. Craig, you talked earlier about algorithms and YouTube defending this censorship because of algorithms. Let's just do a very, very quick rundown for some of our friends who may not understand exactly how that works. When you make a post on Facebook, for example, and you have a bunch of friends, and you post something on Facebook and it gets pushed out to your friends and it shows up on your friends' pages. Well, there's not a little person who runs around and, emails each one of those individually. It's all done by a computer program called an algorithm. It's a mathematical formula that determines who's going to see those links. And these algorithms are weighted, which means that they've been given a certain kind of a bias. The more stuff that you put out and the more stuff that gets shared and liked, the more likely they are to push it, and the wider they are that they will push it. But since these are mathematical formulas, they can be adjusted, and they can be adjusted in such a way that nobody knows they're being adjusted. And you can look around and do very simple things, like if you say a post that says Donald Trump an idiot or fascist or something like that, then Facebook can promote those posts a lot wider and make sure they get seen by a lot more people. If, on the other hand, the computer looks at a post and it says Trump, genius, president, respect, honor, make America great again, those posts can be suppressed and make sure they're seen by fewer people. And Craig, the problem with this is we have no way of knowing other than our own anecdotal evidence, which is growing very powerful, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the unfortunate truth. I mean, there are a few things that we do know, and we know on Facebook, when we, in particular, that say you have 2 million followers. PragerU has 2 million followers on Facebook. When we post something, it won't go out to all 2 million followers. Facebook will automatically only send it to a certain percentage, and we're told it's between 2 and 3% of our followers organically. So people who have opted in to follow our page and they want to receive our content, even the way it's set up now, 2 to 3% will see it. Now, I have no doubt, some of our videos, which will be on a roll, and we had a video on the Electoral College last year with 50 million views on Facebook right after the election, and everyone was talking about the Electoral College with Trump and Hillary. That video was moving and moving and moving. Once it hit 50 million, which is a great number, and we're happy with it, it just all of a sudden stopped. And so we were, the rate of sharing slowed down. Everything really slowed down. So it was odd.
Yeah, that's right. And so somebody said, whoa, hold on now. If we start explaining the meaning of the Electoral College to people, and millions and millions and millions of Americans are seeing this video, and the Electoral College makes some sense because I've done a little lecturing on that myself, then wait a minute. If people start learning about why the Electoral College exists and why it's necessary, then that will mean that Donald Trump was legitimately elected, and our entire argument at the time, which was Hillary got more votes than Donald Trump did in the popular vote, will be meaningless, right? And so we have to do something to put our boot on the throat of that information. It makes you wonder, Craig, and the real question is, for people like you and me, what are they so afraid of? We know what they're afraid of. They're afraid that if information gets out there, the American people will never vote Democrat again. But just this morning on Grant Stinchfield's show, Grant was saying that a number of big organizations like the Washington Post and U.S. News and World Report and all the rest of them, they said that the NRA is gone nuts. They're losing their minds. And the reason I think for this is that the NRA, and the reason I'm proud to be here, is now becoming a defender of First Amendment rights as vigorously as they have been of Second Amendment rights. And I get the feeling, Craig, and I'm curious to get your take on it, that these people, having been given 40 years to control the message without any pushback at all, have suddenly realized that with the election of Donald Trump, these conservatives are suddenly emboldened and they're fighting back. And of course, Prager and you and all of us, me, my work, we've all been doing this for 7, 8, 10 years now. But do you get the sense that they're scared? Do you get the sense that they know that the game is not what it used to be, that we are coming back with messaging that's not just messaging, it's actually better messaging than what they're putting out?
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right. They are losing their control that they've had for many decades. They owned traditional media, and now that traditional media is dead, and we saw that with the election, Trump used social media, went directly around every single outlet that just hammered him 24 hours a day, and he was able to win the presidency that way. It does scare them that they don't have control. I mean, the irony is they build these platforms like YouTube and Facebook, and YouTube's mission statement is, we want to be a platform for freedom of speech, freedom of expression. We are a place where people are free to express their opinions and their ideas without fear. You know, they stand on this freedom of speech ground, but the moment they don't agree with the speech, we really see who the tolerant ones are. And they are losing control even with their own platforms. And it just goes to, YouTube is not the government, but big government, big control. They want to control the message that's getting out there. And it starts to make them nervous that conservatives are seeing success, like us, like your show, like the Daily Wire. A lot of conservative organizations are having success, and that really scares them. So they're panicking and they're starting to restrict videos, but that's not working too well for them. I mean, we have a petition up at PragerU.com, and we have over 250,000 signatures, 250,000 of people who have raised their hand, and they're not all conservatives. We've heard from a lot of people who are, your blue collar Democrats or independents or libertarians who say, look, I don't agree with all the PragerU videos, but I definitely don't think that they're inappropriate for kids. So I'm going to sign this petition. So there's a lot of people out there who aren't happy about this. And YouTube's a private company. They have a legal right to do it, but the hypocrisy and all the left-wing videos that they have up there. One more example, Bill, you might find entertaining or amusing, is that we have a video on e-cigarette. Yeah, okay. We have a video on e-cigarettes, the case for e-cigarettes. That video is restricted, yet if you want to watch videos on marijuana and any other drug, they're not restricted. So it's just, it goes to show you they want to slow us down.
Yeah, they sure do. And Craig, you know what? I'd like to have a conversation with you again very, very soon about the whole problem of this being that these are privately owned companies. They can do whatever they want to. Craig, thanks so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure talking to you. You're a terrific guest. And Craig is the Chief Marketing Officer for Prager University. And thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Bill. I appreciate it.
Our pleasure. That's it, folks. That's the problem. That's the plan. They know we're starting to succeed, so they're doing everything they can to shut us down. But we're not going to let them shut us down, are we? We're not going to let that happen. You can become a member at BillWhittle.com. You can become a member at at the NRA, obviously, and you can keep watching NRA TV. We will be back tomorrow. More fights to fight, and we will see you then. A couple of weeks ago, a segment of Bill Nye Saves the World premiered on Netflix. It's worth a little watch. So here's Bill Nye, the science guy, presenting some science by Bill Nye.
'Cause my sex junk is so much more than either power bottom or a top off. Versatile love may have some butt stuff. It's evolution, ain't nothing new. There's nothing taboo about a sex stew. Just add salt or Gerard Depardieu.
All I can say is thank God for science and a 61-year-old dressed like Pee Wee Herman, only without the fashion sense, laying down the fat science beats with DJ Seahorse. Bill Nye Saves the World also lectures us on other things beyond sexual orientation, but the one thing that Bill Nye and all of the other sex junk peddling progressives, what they're really lecturing us about is our lack of respect for science. You see, we conservatives are just too plain stupid to understand the nuanced complexities of scientific concepts such as this one. It's beyond our limited comprehension. Bill Nye also has a YouTube video out describing what would happen if all the ice on the Earth were to melt. And folks, it's not pretty. Is this our future in 20 years, 50 maybe? Well, it turns out that National Geographic says that this process would take 5,000 years. You know, from the birth of Christ to today, then all the way back to the birth of Christ again, and then halfway back again. They left that part out of the video. And given the effect that half a century of Bill Nye's uninterrupted progressive policies have had on American cities, I'm not sure places like Detroit and Chicago and Newark are going to be habitable in 5 years, let alone 5,000. Now, if you look at this chart from NOAA, which my primitive non-scientific guy mind dimly grasps as one of the 2 or 3 data sets that all of their conclusions come from, well, you can see that this says that sea levels are rising at, my God, what is that rate? Is it feet, yards? Oh, millimeters. It's 3 millimeters a year. Let's see now, 3 millimeters a year, that means in 100 years, I wish I had a science guy here to check my numbers, we'll be up to 300 millimeters. Why, that's 11.8 inches. That's almost a foot. During the last century, sea levels rose by about an average of 1.8 millimeters per year. That's 7 inches. Now, we managed to deal with 7 inches of sea level rise using wooden cartwheels and sandbags. The thought of coping with 12 inches in an age of nuclear power, hydraulics, and reinforced concrete at the very beginning of the next century of technological and engineering progress, well, that's clearly climate denial insanity. And also, I'm a little bit confused about Kansas. Science tells us that during the late Cretaceous period, around 80 million years ago or so, Kansas was directly under the Western Interior Seaway. It was a vast inland ocean, 2,000 miles long, 600 miles wide, and 2,500 feet deep. And 80 million years ago, Kansas wasn't just grass. There were plesiosaurs and masses of fish in the ocean, pterosaurs in the air, and T-Rex and Triceratops and velociraptors all on the balmy shores of Nebraska. Now here's where I get a little confused. Current CO2 levels are about 400 parts per million, and we're told that if they get to 450 parts per million, our children will burst into flames before they drown. But 80 million years ago, CO2 levels were about 1,000 parts per million. In fact, during the Cambrian period 500 million years ago, CO2 levels were perhaps 7,000 parts per million. So 80 million years ago, Kansas was under 2,500 feet of water, but 80,000 years ago, Kansas wasn't under a half mile of water. Kansas was under 2 miles of ice. CO2 levels fell to about 180 parts per million. That's probably roughly the all-time low. Now look, I don't want to live under a half a mile of water, and I don't want to try to commute to work under 2 miles of ice either, but I taught astronomy for 20 years, and I've been a technician in a geochronology lab using thermoluminescence to date pottery shards. So while I may not be a climate scientist, and neither is Bill Nye, by the way, who has a degree in mechanical engineering, I at least know what real science looks like. See, this video isn't about temperatures. It's about the fundamental integrity of science being weaponized into politics. Real science is based on repeatability of experiments, control testing, and perpetual skepticism versus appeals to authority and moving political levers by leaving out certain things like, maybe 5,000 years to melt all of the Earth if the temperatures were to go from 57 degrees Fahrenheit up to about 84 degrees. Telling half of that truth is not science, it's fraud. It's showing New York underwater without saying in 5,000 years, because 5,000 years ago, Troy was the city on the coast, not New York, and the ancient city of Babylon was still 800 years in the future. So here's a couple of quick questions for you, science guys. Whose factories and auto emissions got CO2 to 2.5 times current levels 80 million years ago? And how did CO2 levels go from a Cambrian high of 7,000 parts per million to a quaternary low of about 180 parts per million without Bill Nye, Al Gore, Leonardo DiCaprio, and all of the other science guys? Hey, speaking of Leo, here he is holding a sign that says, "Climate change is real." Well, no shit, Sherlock. Al Gore and the rest of the crowd sold the American people, in fact, the entire world, on this. This is a graph of pretty much stable temperatures, then a drastic, unprecedented rise corresponding to fossil fuel use. This chart that they use goes back 1,000 years. Hey, here's a world temperature chart that goes back 11,000 years. The little red bar you see is the length of the hockey stick sample that got this ball rolling in the first place. Temperatures have been in constant flux for the last 11,000 years. And the last 450,000 years. And for the last 4.6 billion years. There's nothing before that here on Earth. The blue line here, by the way, is temperature. The purple is CO2 levels. Now, there's a scientific term for this delta, this rise and fall of temperatures, and that scientific term is called change. Constant rhythmic climate change, and nothing but constant rhythmic climate change going back not 1,000 years, but 4.6 billion years. The idea of fighting climate change is not science. It's a non sequitur. It doesn't make any sense. The climate's always changing. It's like warning us about, daylight change because the sun is getting closer to the horizon. That's true, but there's kind of more to the story, isn't there? Now, just last night, by a very happy coincidence, I heard the super progressive BBC discussing climate change with a climate scientist who said that up until 2012, there had been no reliable data for the amount of trees in what's known as a dry forest habitat. Finally, using satellite imaging, they started to get real data, and then a little over a year ago, they realized that there were more dry forest trees than they'd originally assumed back when they started their computer models. So, how much more? 5%? 10%? Well, it turns out that there are 40% more trees in the dry forest than they thought when they made a guess that's almost half again more green, cheap, free CO2 scrubbers in dry forest environments than originally thought. How big are the Earth's dry forests? Well, on this map, they're represented in yellow. Almost half again more trees in the yellow areas now that we've actually measured it rather than just guessed at it. Science, real science, not science guy science, is the process of using any and all data available to destroy a theory. The theories that cannot be experimentally destroyed are probably true. That's science. And not just saying the atmosphere doesn't match the computer models I have, so the atmosphere must be wrong. That's why we have to have reproducible experiments, control groups, and all of the rest. So maybe we don't need Bill Nye to save the planet. Maybe this 4.5 billion year old graph tells us that temperatures do fluctuate constantly, but you'll notice that there's an upper and a lower limit going all the way back to the creation of the planet, and not a runaway spike up into a perpetual molten slag heap or down to an eternal ball of ice. Maybe life on Earth is here and remains here, because things like cloud cover and vegetation growth are, in fact, natural and extremely effective feedback mechanisms, which would mean that the Earth has no need of Bill Nye, or progressives for that matter, to save the planet. Because the Earth is built in such a way that it knows how to save itself. We need your help to keep these messages coming. If you want to help us make a difference, please go to BillWhittle.com and become a member.